This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I didn't program. I basically programmed programmers because I realized early on that if I wanted to have anything that was going to appear on these machines that I wanted to have appear on them, I was going to have to work with artists and programmers and musicians and animators.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Gary Koffler was vice president at two publishers, Datasoft and Datamost. He was vice president of software at Datasoft in 1980-81. Datasoft published many Atari computer games, including Canyon Climber, Clowns and Balloons, Pacific Coast Highway, Sands of Egypt, and Zaxxon. At Datasoft, Gary managed the creation of the Atari Writer word processor under contract for Atari. Next, Gary was vice president of software and talent at Datamost from 1982 to 1984. Datamost published Atari games including Mr. Robot and His Robot Factory, Tale of Beta Lyrae, Cohen's Towers, and Super Bunny. Datamost also published many books for the Atari computer, including Atari Roots, Kids in the Atari, the Elementary Atari, and Games Ataris Play. This interview took place on April 4th, 2017.
Started off at Abraham Lincoln School in Burbank, California, elementary school, AV squad, if you will. Was told how to operate the slide projector by one of the teachers until I realized that she didn't really know what she was talking about, and I sort of did it my way, and it worked better that way. Went to junior high school, and I was probably a geek back then. I liked the science research classes and astronomy and all the different sciences. And then high school, pretty geekish there too, I guess. But yeah, I still was. I wasn't a nerd, if you will. So I still played sports, and I knew about girls and all that kind of stuff. And when I was in high school, I'd gone through school since elementary school with Bill Depew, and Bill and I formed Soft Tape back with Bill Smith. But I guess in sixth grade, which would have been around 1959, a guy named Rex Parsons brought a computer into the class, and that computer was actually made out of plastic parts, and I think it was called the Compu something or other, I don't remember the name of it, and that was kind of intriguing. And he also showed me my first 15-gallon aquarium, and I got real interested in fish too. I took an electronics class, if you will, in junior high school, and somebody there had a diagram of how to do something with, I can't remember what the output display was, but it used a rotary dial, and it did additive, cumulative kinds of calculations by spinning the dial around and hitting relays. And I don't think they were LED displays at that time. I think they were just lights that were inside drilled holes in a wooden box that indicated what the accumulation was in the registers, if you will, the relays. So that was really, I didn't really play a lot of any of that stuff until, I guess, 1977, when, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. The Apple II brochure appeared. And at that time, actually, I was working with, I was doing a job with a company called Nectonics. And what Nectonics did was ultraviolet sterilizer bulbs for saltwater aquariums and test kits and things like that. And I'd given a talk about keeping a saltwater fish tank alive, going. A guy approached me afterwards and said, do you guys carry 4-watt ultraviolet sterilizer bulbs? I said, yeah, what size tank do you have? He says, well, I don't have a tank. I've got an EEPROM. And I said, what's an EEPROM? And that changed my world pretty much. He said, it's an erasable, programmable, read-only memory. I said, what's that? He goes, well, it's a chip that you can program electronically, but when you want to erase it, it's got a little window on top of the chip that you shine a UV bulb into for 24 hours, and it erases, and you can reprogram. I go, well, this I got to see. So I went to to his place of business called Quad 8, and they were doing digital sampling of music and using digital filters to get out the pops and the hisses and basically clean up the sounds. And I walked in the lobby and I looked up at the screen, and there was my name up on the screen, said, welcome to Quad 8, Gary Koffler. I'm like, how'd you do that? He said, with an S100 computer. I go, what's an S100 computer? So I started to doing some inquiries, and the guy another guy who I'd met through one of the fish stores said, "Hey, you got to meet my friend Bill. We're building a Byte 8 computer." I go, "What do you mean you're building a computer?" And so I went over there and they showed me an S100 computer they were building. And I said, "Hey, this sounds cool. Let me get in on this. What do I need?" He goes, "Well, we need a floppy disk drive, 5.25-inch floppy drive." I went, "Whatever that is, how much?" That was $400 or $500. I said, "Okay, I'm in." Then I went out and I was cruising the United States at that time doing talks about keeping saltwater aquariums alive. And so actually about that time also, the guy that was building the computers was also building plexiglass hoods for them so that people who were building these cards could actually see the cards and the LEDs that were lighting up on them and how the dip switches were set.
That sounds a lot like an aquarium.
Yeah, it was pretty early on. That was Bill Smith. And about that time, I bought one of the first 200. I just took my spot for gasoline. Okay. Bought one of the first 200 Apple II computers from a computer store in the San Fernando Valley where I lived. And since I was still working for that New York company, Nextonics, going around fish stores and giving talks about saltwater fish, I was also collecting software from the newly minted computer stores that were starting to appear all over the country. Mm-hmm. So I basically put together a collection of, I guess that time you'd call it freeware. And we decided to set up a software membership deal at Soft Tech. We first called it Soft Tech, but there was already a Soft Tech down in San Diego and they objected to the name. So we renamed it Soft Tape. And Bill and I started bagging up cassette tapes inside Ziploc bags. Yeah, no one had done that before we did. And we printed up nice. I don't really talk about that part of it too much. Silas Werner at Muse, I think he was doing Ziploc bags around the same time as well. But we put 8 cassettes into a Ziploc bag and sold it for like $20 along with a membership. And it was all the software, the free software that I collected on my travels across country as a saltwater expert on saltwater tanks. Okay, moving right along. Then we met Bob Bishop at a computer users group meeting.
Wow! Uh-huh.
And he was doing stuff with the Apple II. He's working at JPL, and he showed us one of his programs, which was I guess it was Apple Talker, where you could actually he found a way to digitize voice using the zero crossing on the Apple II cassette ports, and he was actually able to get the computer to talk. So he said, "Hey, let us sell this to our members." And we suddenly had a $20 single cassette that we could sell to our members instead of 8 cassettes for $20. Mm-hmm. That was a good deal. And then Apple Listener came along, and Tic Tac Talker, and Talking Calculator, and a host of other Bob Bishop programs. So yeah, we went to the West Coast Computer Fair. We showed off the voice synthesis and voice recognition capabilities of an 8-bit 6502 based Apple II computer. Huh. And from there, I think who else did you mention? I went to Datasoft, then Datamost, then for Datamost, where did I go? So this is a problem. I guess it was ICOM Simulations in Chicago. It's Todd Zipnick working on CD-ROM titles and NEC TurboGrafx 16 titles. I guess over my career, I probably published close to 100 titles on TRS-80, Apple II, Atari 400-800, Commodore 64, then got into the Amiga 1000, became friends with R.J. Michael, family. Then after the Amiga, some PC titles. We were doing Macintosh titles at ICOM. And then I was working for I came back to California after my Chicago trip at ICOM Simulations and started working with a little startup here called Umi Corp. And I had introduced them to something called an expert system. Some guy, Daniel Wolf, came to me when I was at VP of software at Datamost, with something called an expert system. And I knew these guys were doing AI kinds of things back in that year, which would have been It was before the Macintosh, I guess. So it was 81, 82, 83, somewhere in there. And they produced a little box to do expert controller kinds of decision making based on rule-based calculations on this 6502. And they hooked it up to PLCs, Allen Bradley PLCs for factory floors, and they were doing all that. And while I was there, we also got involved in a VR project with Jaron Lanier. I mean, this just goes on and on, man. I'm kind of rambling now, just, from where you had me start off to 81 with Datamost and Datasoft.
Wow. Awesome. So
yeah, almost too much to remember, dude.
Tell me a little more about soft tape. I mean, was this ever a big venture, or were we just talking like pizza money, or did this ever become like a thing?
Well, I mean, the problem back then, that would be 1977, 78, before I went to work for Computerland in San Francisco, actually. That just dawned on me. I was selling Apple IIs back then at Computerland in San Francisco. There weren't that many potential sales to be made. There just weren't that many computers sold yet. I mean, now it's 1 million a day practically. Is that right? 1 million a month, 30-some million a year. I don't know what it's up to these days. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it was pizza money. It was, we paid the rent, we paid employees, we bought blank cassettes and recorded them by hand at first on 6 Akai tape decks. I would sit there and I'd open the drawers on these 6 cassette tapes. Cassette tape recorders, Akais, as I recall. I'd hit pause, record, play, pause, record, play 6 times, put the cassettes in, close the drawers, type 4A.FFW, 800.FFFW. Then I'd take off the play on each one. I'd record them. Then I'd stop them. I'd eject all 6 of them, and then I'd do it all again. I did that into the middle of the night to create these cassette tapes by hand. Wow. And that was soft tape. So it was better than pizza money. I mean, we were able to do pretty well for 3 college guys. And all 3 of us were college dropouts early, right up there with laws and jobs. But they became much more successful because they were selling those computers. We were just selling the software, but it was profitable, certainly. But It wasn't millions of units. It was, even when I was at Datasoft and ICOM, we started out the months with 10, maybe 20,000 copies of a new title, and because of our name, people knew us, and we sold that many. But it's nothing like what it is today, where we're talking millions of copies of titles.
So how did you end up at Datasoft? What were you initially hired as? I know eventually you became vice president software. So tell me that story.
Well, I got hired in as VP of software. Basically, we had met Dave Gordon. Oh, excuse me. Let me back that up. Mm-hmm. That would have been Pat Ketchum. I was working at the Computer Lane in San Francisco, and I got a phone call from Mel Norell, that's what his name was, who had worked with Dave Gordon at Datasoft. Tough. Datamost. And they formed Datamost out of Programma International. And Programma International came about after we had started Soft Tape, and Dave Gordon was one of the people that provided us with some of the free software that we ended up putting on cassettes, and he wanted to do the same thing. So we started Programma International in the basement of the hotel in Los Angeles on Wilshire, where Robert Kennedy was assassinated, and the name doesn't immediately strike my brains. But I had left Soft Tape, and I'd gone up to Northern California, was working at a Computerland, and got a phone call from Mel Norell asking me if I was interested in another startup down in Southern California. I go, who? He goes, Datasoft. I go, what do they want to do? He said, they want to do Atari software and Apple software and whatever else, and PC software at that time. So I went down there, and they offered me enough money that it was worth my while. Or at that point, they were working with a guy who was doing some kind of accounting software, and they were more interested in doing some consumer software. And I brought Bob Bishop kind of along with me to do some of his titles that would be moved over to the Atari. And I had a kind of a stable, literally cubicles of programmers that were under my direction to do these Apple titles and and Atari titles. I think the first title that Bob brought over was Micro Painter, and we ended up doing that across two platforms, the Apple and the Atari. And I think we might have gone over to another platform, but it doesn't immediately strike my mind where we went with it. But yeah, I worked at Datasoft for some time, a couple of years anyway. And then some of the programmers came along with me. We started our own little independent venture, which then got kind of absorbed by Datamost, and that was Dave Gordon. And I became BT software there, and we did PC software, Commodore 64 software, Apple II software, a couple of PC titles. But their main claim to fame was they entered every month with $1 million in sales to rest in publishing. We were doing books, Kids in the Apple, Kids in the Atari, programming the Apple, programming the Panasonic, programming the Atari. And that was the money that supported the software sales, which, again, the industry was just growing, and the user base of computer owners, of personal computer owners, microcomputer owners, if you will, was starting to get bigger. So, but it was still never more than, some thousands of titles a month. But there was always a competition who was going to make it on the soft sell top 100 list that week. Was it going to be us? Was it going to be Broderbund? Was it going to be Sierra Online? Was it going to be Synapse Software? And all of us, back in those days, we were all buddies. We hung out to trade shows, and a lot of stories that I absolutely positively cannot tell on any podcast, and I will take some of those with me to my grave. It was wild times. It was, we were all making more money than we'd ever made before, and there was no end in sight. The industry was growing, and the titles now were starting to come, and we were developing them ourselves. We were getting outside submissions. We had at Datamost, we had Paul Stevenson. We had the Aztec title. We had I guess I was at Soft Tape. We did do a word processor. I think that was Bill DePue and Gary Shannon did it for the Apple II. And then we ended up doing the Atari Writer word processor for Atari under a contract when I was at Datasoft. Wow. This is stuff I haven't thought about in a long time, man. It's sorry it's so disjointed.
That's all right. Get it. Neat. So I didn't know about the Atari Writer thing. I'm trying to get the name of the guy who wrote it. I just emailed him.
Yeah, that would be. I know. You
William Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a story there. William was a high school kid who basically wrote the word processor on his Atari 800 so he could do his homework, literally. And I can't remember. I guess one of the other programs that worked for us told us about him, and he came in. He showed us what he had, and I worked with him to make it better. To put some of the features in that I knew a word processor needed, based on what Soft Tape had done with the what was that one called? It was for the Apple II, something Apple Writer. No, it was Magic Window. Bill DePue had come up with an algorithm so that he could scroll a high-res screen left and right like a typewriter Platin. And so when it came time to do the Atari Writer, I worked with William on that. And when the first sales came through, I walked up to his front doorstep with a $60,000 check for his part of royalties. And here was a 16-year-old kid with, more money than he'd ever had in his life. And he went out and bought a nice car. And then a couple of years later, as the more royalty checks were rolling in, he emancipated himself and moved out of his parents' home. And I don't know what he's doing today, but he was pretty successful over the years doing software. I don't know what he did after Atari Writer. I know Mark Riley kind of picked up some of the work to help get that done and inserted an Easter egg into it, probably one of the first Easter eggs to appear on the Atari 800 with the correct key sequence, or I can't remember if it was a key sequence or a joystick sequence. You get these scrolling bars of rainbow colors on the screen, and Atari got pretty pissed at that because they built a lot of cartridges. It was that's what it was. He'd done the cartridge version. I think William had done the disc version. Again, details I just don't remember.
Nice. So this was all under contract for Atari, and then they paid a royalty for every sale. Sounds like.
That's correct.
Nice.
Yeah, that was when I was at Datasoft.
Very nice.
I did a similar deal with Amiga. Amiga was going to give us a quarter for every Amiga sold that included the music software that Mark Riley had done for the Amiga. It ended up being sold through Aegis under the name Sonix, Sonix. But then Trammell bought the company, and the deal changed, and we never got that money, but we got some royalties from Aegis when they sold the program for the Amiga.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, basically my career has been one of flying under the radar. It's Dave Gordon at Datasoft got all the publicity, Todd Zipnick at ICOM Simulation, Pat Ketchum at Datamost. But I was the guy producing the software with the programmers and working with the musicians and the artists, and it didn't go out until I got the high score and on the game and knew that other people were going to have to be much better than me to get that high score or better, and in fact make it a little harder than it already is, or make this a little slower, make this a little faster, change that character, and that's pretty proud of the titles. I think the only one that I never really wished my name had gone on was Super Bunny. I don't remember if we did that for the Atari or not. I'm sure we did it for the Apple II.
Bunny, and I'm not. Super Bunny was.
Paint Magic.
Super Magic Bunny was published
Robot
for the Atari. Yeah.
Yeah, and Paint Magic. Was it Paint Magic? Is that what we called it? Micro Painter did end up going over to the Commodore 64, and I think the Atari. And yeah, I can't remember anymore. Wow.
What was so bad about Super Bunny?
The graphics. Just the guy we assigned to do the graphics. I was never very impressed with them, and I stepped into it. I wasn't really managing the project, but they developed this bunny rabbit that would jump across a conveyor belt that go up and down alternately. One would be going up, the next one would be going down. You got to jump on these platforms and get to the other side. And I said, okay, well, that's great, but now what? They go, yeah, we don't know what happens when he jumps to the other side. I go, well, when he gets to the other side, turn him into a superhero and call him Super Bunny. And when he comes back the other direction, when he hits these platforms, there's usually characters on the platforms, which when you went one direction to the left, you had to avoid them because they would kill you. But when you were Super Bunny and you jumped to the right, you then killed them. So my credit on the title is Super Bunny Concept. And fortunately, when they do screenshots of that game, my name for Super Bunny Concept falls just below the screen capture. So not a lot of people really actually know that, but that's the one title that I kind of was back on. I wish I had at least contributed that part of it.
I'm looking at the list of games here. I don't know what was published before or after you left. It's Mr. Robot and his Robot Factory.
One of my favorite games. And yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite titles. Well, I was friends with Bill Budge, who back in the Apple II days, I'd met through Bob Bishop, who was working at Apple, and he and a guy named Andy Hertzfeld, who ended up being one of the major contributors to the Macintosh at Apple. Bill had come up with, I don't know if he worked with Andy on it or not, with a program called Pinball Construction Set, where you could actually create your own pinball systems on the screen, and you would apply different physics and different attributes to the paddles and whatever, and the spring-loaded bouncing portions. And he had done a little race game for the Apple II, and he'd done something else. And I said, hey, man, why don't you come on down to L.A., let me take a look at this, show it to my two partners, and maybe we can publish these things for you. And so they did. They came down to L.A., but unfortunately, the day they came by unannounced, I wasn't there, and my two partners didn't know what to do with them, so they ended up going with Pacific Digital, I think was the name, and they published a 3-pack, 3 games, 3 of Bill Budge's games in a package, a Ziploc bag. So, but I was still a big fan of the construction set idea. So when I came to do the Mr. Robot, the idea was build your own playing field with ladders and conveyor belts and trampolines and things like that. You would basically pick up a trampoline and you just paint it on the screen. You'd apply it to different places, and you'd put gaps, and you'd put the conveyor belts in, and then you'd put Mr. Robot on there, and you'd try it and see if you could actually clear the level. And so we did that for the Apple II, and we did that for the Atari. I don't think we ever got around to a Commodore version of it, but I've always thought that that concept of build your own, which of course over the years the concept developed, and there was lots of mods that came out to many games. Where you could create your own levels. That became real popular. But I always thought that, even in later years, that we should redo that game and use the more state-of-the-art graphics that came along, and do first person, do all kinds of stuff. But it was pretty early on for an 8-bit computer to do that. It wasn't until Nasser Gabelli came along with some of his 3D graphic routines for the Apple II, and some of the work I did on the Atari conversions of games, that guys like Charlie Kellner was able to come up with routines that could emulate 3D graphics on 8-bit machines and make some of the driving games possible. But I was pretty much out of the business at that time.
Let's see what else. I'm looking at other Jet Boot Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian, I think Brian. That came out of England. One of our producers produced that one, but I was there when Jet Boot Jack happened. Sure, I barely remember the game. I wasn't intimately involved in its publication or development.
Right.
Keep going. Throw them at me. I'll tell you yes or no.
Sure. Yeah. Tale of Beta Lyrae.
Sure, I was involved in that one.
Yeah.
The two guys, Gilbert, and I can't remember the other guy's name, from Hawaii. Original score that was awesome, and Tale of Beta Lyrae. Yeah, that was a good title.
Lyrae. I've been saying it wrong.
As I recall.
I've been saying it wrong for 30 years.
Lyrae.
Yeah,
that's how they pronounced it. Tale of Beta Lyrae.
Polar Pierre.
That was kind of at the edge of my involvement at Datasoft, I think. That was a Ron Rosen title, as I recall. I wasn't involved in that too much. Keep going.
Roundabout.
Not me.
Not you.
That was early. Oh God, that was early days. Continue.
Night Raiders.
No.
My Chess 2.
Yes. Oh God. The terrible story there was we had to beat Sargon, was the competition back in those days.
Right.
And the story there was that it did, and it was a good title. And as I recall, I think we got one of the better artists of the time, a guy named Art Huff, to do the graphics for it. And the graphics were pretty nice. He went on to do the graphics for Mindscape as well for their chess program. And they were awesome graphics. But the worst part of that story was when we hired the guy to do the advertising, and he had it was a very dark image of a woman. She's got the door partially open, like she's letting somebody in the front door. And she's got this very sexy dress on with an open back, and she's got the My Chess program sort of in her left hand, her right hand, down by her side. And it was as if she was inviting someone to come inside, and they were going to play My Chess. It was a very sexy ad, and we actually published the ad, and only to discover that Revlon, I believe it was, had done the exact same ad prior to this one, that the agency that we got to do our ad had ripped off the Revlon ad, pretty much verbatim. Yeah, that's what I remember about My Chess.
Did I say Night Raiders? Forgot what.
Yes, you did.
Okay.
No, it wasn't there.
Okay, Monster Smash.
Yeah, the only thing I can tell you about that one is that I was one of. I mean, most of the games that you're talking about, if I wasn't intimately involved in their production and development, and I was a tester. I found all the problems in the games before they would go out. And the only thing I can say about that one, Monster Smash, I also worked with the artists that did the covers and some of the artwork of the characters. The eyes on the front of Monster Smash. No, that would be Mabel's Mansion. I'm sorry. Monster Smash, this tester. Mabel's Mansion, the eyes in the front cover are my ex-wife's.
Nice. All right,
she wasn't ex at the time, but
right. There's a game that has no picture and no data, and maybe this is weird, on bad data. A game called Mating Zone.
Oh dear, yeah, that was from the Programma International days. That was before my time. I wasn't involved in Mating Zone, but I'm pretty sure that was It was either a Datamost title before I got there, or it was a Programma International title, Dave Gordon's company. And I met Dave Gordon at the Long Beach Apple Users Group, and that's how we became friends, and how I ended up as a VP software there. Actually, at Datamost, I had my favorite title of all, which is VP of Artist and Repertoire, which was a title that came out of VP of A&R, title that came out of the music industry, where the guys that acted as the liaison, the interface between the publisher and the musicians, the band, if you will. So, except in the case of my A&R position, I was taking care of and meeting the needs and requirements of these guys who were like 16, 17, 18 years old, 19. So I'm taking them out to El Torito's for Mexican dinners and buying them soft drinks and bringing in the snacks to the office. And at lunchtime, I'd give them each a $10 roll of quarters so they could go play the latest video games, and they could see what Atari was doing and Williams was doing, and what we might co-opt as ideas for our next game. So that was my favorite title in the computer industry.
Nice. So quick tangent. What was it like managing those kids, just trying to get them to program and keep them on task and keep them motivated? And that seems like it might have been difficult.
Well, it really wasn't too bad because these kids were already motivated to do something with these home computers that they'd gotten. And they were delving into their operations. So, and they were always discovering new things. I mean, a lot of what made our titles really unique in the earliest days, especially at Soft Tape, were that we were doing things on the computer that even was a good friend of mine over the years, because of the software we were producing for his computer. He didn't know they could do that. I mean, he certainly hadn't considered counting zero crossings on the cassette interface port in an Apple II could lead to voice recognition and voice synthesis. So these kids were already highly motivated. They were doing it for free anyway, so to be getting paid for it, no problem at all.
All right. Jet Boot Jack.
I mean, we had. Let me say again, we had prima donnas, but that's another story. So again, Jet Boot Jack was Brian. I can't remember his last name. He produced that one. I wasn't involved. I can barely remember it, except I'm sure I played it.
Cosmic Tunnels.
Well, the company was growing so big, Datamost, that we got into some marketing plans for the big Consumer Electronics Show. We put on a real big show that year. I can't remember, it was 83 maybe. Yeah, it was before the Mac. And the idea was to associate the game with some sort of character. And we chose Captain Sticky as a superhero. And we chose him, and we ended up hiring a bunch of the Chicago Honey Bear cheerleaders to work the booth. They were all dressed in sort of Captain America, Wonder Woman kinds of outfits, and Captain Sticky was at the booth, and we rented a couple of limos and a half track that we put everybody on and drove through the streets of Chicago, throwing parties at Faces, a very popular nightclub at that time, and the Playboy Club. So Cosmic Tunnel was, that's really all I remember of Cosmic Tunnel was the promotion we did. And I'm sure I beta tested that one as well. But I can't remember the gameplay much at all.
Cohen's Towers.
Next. Frank Cohen. Yeah, it was an elevator game. I kind of helped them work out some of the features on that, but they pretty much handled that themselves. And not much to say about that one.
All right.
Next.
Bilestode?
Bilestode happened while I was there, but it already was in development when I got there. That was pretty cool because it was one of the first top-down view games and included some pretty violent scenes. But I really wasn't involved in its production.
Huh. It's one of the few that is rare enough that it hasn't been archived. There's no screenshots. You can't download it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder if I've got a copy somewhere. I don't think I do.
Yeah. Well, also there's a few others in that category, including Mating Zone and Pigpen and Airstrike. Yeah. So if you find anything around, let me know.
Yeah, Pigpen for sure was a Programma International title that came in a Ziploc bag. Mating Zone was before my time. I think that might have been Programma International. Airstrike, I don't remember at all. It was like one of those canon games or something.
Aztec.
Aztec was an amazing game. That was one of the first adventure games of its genre, side-scrolling. It was before the one from Activision, which was real popular, the name of which escapes me. I'm pretty sure it was patterned after Aztec. A lot of extensive troubleshooting and gameplay was my involvement on that title. I think that was Paul Stevenson, who people are still looking for, by the way.
Oh, are they?
I don't know. Yeah, people have been trying to locate him, and apparently he sort of disappeared off the planet. Maybe they came and finally picked him up and took him away to his home planet. I don't know. Hey, listen, this is going to be an audio podcast. This is not going to be oh, Lordy. Okay. It's been in the back of my mind while I've been answering these questions, but it's good. I got a face for radio.
All right. Artie the Aardvark.
Yeah, that was a cool game. I was involved in testing that and got my aunt involved in that one. My uncle was a deputy district attorney in Los Angeles and real close to them as a family, my cousins, and they got an Atari 400. I threw a real keyboard on it, and I gave them Artie the Aardvark, and I said, "Here, knock yourselves out. Go to town on it." And they beat that game up, and my aunt and her neighbors, man, every single day they played that game. They just loved it. Huh. And as I recall, it was a derivation of another game. I think it was the one with the miner that went down, Dig Dug. And
it looks like a ripoff. I haven't played it, but just the base of the screenshot, I would say it's a ripoff of Anteater, which was an arcade game. Bingo.
You're right. That was it. But Dig Dug did come along, and I think we did something similar to that too. If not, I'm just confusing it with Artie the Aardvark. But yeah, you're right. That's exactly right. And the first title that I ever did that was a ripoff, and we got called on it, was at Apple for the Apple back in the soft tape days, and it was Battlestar Galactica. That came out, and Steve Baker produced an Apple II version of that game, and they called us up and said no.
Huh.
So that was back then. Next,
Onk.
Onk was a favorite. That I loved Onk, and they're primarily I worked with. Not good. I can see his face. I can see his black fingernails. I can see his piercings, and I can't remember his name. But you might have the name in front of you, right?
Is it David Brink or Kent Simon?
It was. I think both of them worked on it, but Brink did the puzzles that were just amazing. Things you did in this room then had ramifications in the other room, like a skill you perfected in the one room would unlock a lock in the other room. You had to go back and do that. It was a wonderful, wonderful puzzle game. That was one I wish had gotten wider distribution as well. David got picked up by Apple back in the day. I don't know what he's doing now. Kent Simon is still programming, but I haven't talked to him in years. I see him occasionally on Facebook. Next.
Alternity?
Don't remember it. Next.
I think we already discussed Airstrike. That's on the list for the Atari games that I have for Datamost. I can look up utility. Let's talk about books, though. You involved in any of the books? Atari Roots, Kids in the Atari, any of those?
Just proofreading them.
Yeah.
Didn't write any. Didn't work with any of the writers. Didn't do any technical verification on any of them. But it was certainly the most successful part of Datamost.
Well, yeah, the books are still good. I love Atari Roots. That's a good one.
Yeah. Well, and the other one we did was the, what was it called? The 1541, the Commodore 1541 disk drive book. And actually, Mark Riley did a utility called Quick Load that actually sped up the disk access to the Commodore 64. We showed that at the CES one year, and Commodore was very impressed. We also did Quick Write, which was a word processor for the Commodore 64. I think that was a Mark Riley title. Yeah, it was.
All right, let's see. I found a couple of articles here. We could continue the software name game with Datasoft if you want, but before we do, I have found a couple of articles from InfoWorld magazine, and you had kind of implied there were some things going on that you won't talk about, but this was published July 1984. There's a picture of you dressed with a big what's it called, a sombrero.
Sombrero.
Yeah, it says we won't state flat out that software companies will make money like bandits this Christmas, but we couldn't resist snapping a photo of Gary Koffler Datamost vice president of software in full bandito regalia at the 4th anniversary party of Sierra, formerly Sierra Online, formerly Online Software. Koffler wasn't the only one at the party who had to act tough. Ken Williams of Sierra had to fire an incompetent and allegedly tipsy bartender at the party minutes after he arrived to take on his hosting duties. Some of Williams' friends faithfully tended bar for the rest of the night. The party had a Mexican motif, and Koffler's getup was balanced by Sierra's live entertainment, which included mariachis and flamenco dancers.
And the best thing I can say about that is I don't remember 1 minute of it. I wasn't a drinker really, but I must have been drinking that night because I don't remember it at all. And Ken and I became friends because he started a software company online, Sierra Online, in Coarse Gold, California. And I saw that. I'm like, Coarse Gold, that's right next to Bass Lake, where I've been going since I'm 13 years old every summer to the Great Lake up in the Sierras. And so I went up there and I visited him there, and we got to be friends. And I subsequently got invited to a lot of the Sierra Online get-togethers. In fact, I was one time on my way up the hill to the lake, the Mariposa Fair, Madera Fair, whatever it was going on, and they were giving helicopter rides for $1.25. So I said, hey, give me a ride over to the lake. So he gives me a ride over to the lake, and I'm hovering over the picnic area, blowing everything around where Ken Williams is having his Sierra Online picnic. And then they bring me back to the fairgrounds, and I finished my drive up there. And as I pulled into the parking place, Ken comes running up and he goes, "That was you in the helicopter, wasn't it?" I go, "Yeah, it was." And then subsequent parties, I think I went dressed as Elvis one year. And I think there's also an InfoWorld article about me winning the award at the, what was it? It was the Comdex show for Quick Load for the Commodore 64, coming down the elevator. There was a woman who was the sort of the People magazine editor for InfoWorld, Diane Caruso. And I don't want to put words and ideas into her mind here, but someone suggested she might have had a thing for me because I was in InfoWorld, I think at least 3 times, and with pictures.
Let's see. She said
that's about the only fame I had. I was looking more for fortune, which I never really achieved either. But that's about as out there as I got in those InfoWorld pictures.
Let's see. There's a picture of you holding the award, and it said the company won Datamost won best-selling new product award for Quick Load. Koffler's reaction was to come roaring down the escalator of the MGM Grand Hotel at about Mach 1, his face lit like a neon sign, with Datamost president Dave Gordon a few steps behind. We did it, yelled Koffler.
The deal there was that we'd worked really hard on that. It was really it was a big deal to save as much load time as we could by the Commodore 1541 disk drive. But again, flying under the radar for 40 years in the industry, I was too shy to go up and accept the award. So Dave went and accepted it for me, or for us, for the team. But once I got my hands on that acrylic award, I was beside myself. I was so happy.
It's your girlfriend Denise says that you were crying, and that's why you didn't go up. But
no, that's not true. That's not true.
Okay.
I was not accustomed to big crowds, talking to big crowds, and I couldn't even imagine myself going up there. And then I got a little misty, but I didn't cry.
It's okay.
I was happy.
It's all right.
Tears of happiness. I was young. That was another reason I probably interrelated with the teenage programmers we had, because I was still only in my early 20s at that time.
Sure.
Middle 20s.
Yeah. Cool. Should we? Do you want to play the software name game for Datasoft?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
We'll do it. Say 221B Baker Street plus a lot of add-ons. That was 87. That might have been after your time.
I'm thinking. Hold on a second. Yeah, that was after.
So you were Datasoft 88.
I did, but I was involved in the Sherlock Holmes consulting detective murder mysteries that we produced for CD-ROM when I was at ICOM Simulations in Chicago. We had deals with FM Towns, Fujitsu, and Commodore, and a bunch of others. We did multi-platform CD-ROMs pretty much before anybody. Tried to get Sony interested, but they didn't see the CD-ROM thing taking off. And we also introduced quarter screen full motion video at low frame rates of real actors and actresses acting out the Sherlock Holmes murder mystery that we had licensed from a board game company here in San Francisco. In fact, I went along with Todd to sign that deal, and it was an interactive role-playing game using live actors and actresses. That was pretty cool back in the day. But no, I wasn't involved in Baker Street.
All right. Alternate reality.
No.
That was a big hit for the company, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think I was. If I was only involved in testing.
Okay. Bishop Square, Maxwell's Dungeon. I think it's some Bob Bishop repackaged stuff. Seems like.
Yeah, it was actually Maxwell's.
Demon.
Maxwell's Demon,
Sorry.
and I brought the same way I brought Bob into Datamost. I brought him into Datasoft. Actually, I brought Bob into Datamost after Datasoft, and then Maxwell's Demon became a Datamost product. Wait a minute. It was Datasoft first.
Okay.
Yeah, it was Datasoft first, then Datamost. Bruce Lee, not involved. Zaxxon, not involved.
Okay. Canyon Climber.
Yeah. Tim Ferriss. It was a ripoff of Mario.
Clowns and Balloons.
Excuse me. It was a ripoff of not Mario. It was Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong. Yeah.
I'm sorry. What was the next one you said?
Clowns and Balloons.
Yeah, I was involved in that.
Yeah.
That was mostly testing. That was, I think, Frank Cohen and Mark Riley, as I recall. Maybe it was just Mark. It might have just been Mark.
I believe so.
And that one, I think, was on the Atari as well.
Yeah. Conan.
No, not at all.
All right. The Dallas Quest.
No.
These license
This was
titles.
after I left, and
Okay.
this was after I left,
84.
and Pat Ketchum did a deal with Gillette for an infusion of money. And they were starting to buy licenses to titles. They thought that was going to be the future. So they got Bruce Lee, and they got Zaxxon, and those did pretty well for them.
Dig Dug. You mentioned Dig Dug before. That was
I'm just testing on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, just testing.
Fun with Spelling, Genesis, The Goonies,
No.
Gunslinger, Juno First, Lost Tomb.
None of those.
None of
those.
Yeah.
I was involved. I was at ICOM Simulation when we actually did the hardware interface for the Genesis CD-ROM drive, but I was just transcendentally involved.
I'm trying to pick the earlier titles. Moon Shuttle, Mr. Do, Nibbler, O'Reilly's Mine, Pacific Coast Highway.
O'Reilly's Mine.
Yeah.
O'Reilly's Mine and Pacific Coast Highway, those were both programmers that I did a lot of work with over the years. They were friends. In fact, Mark was the guy, I found him at a Radio Shack. He was a sales guy at a Radio Shack during the TRS-80 days. And he came to work for me, and then he told me about his buddy Ron Rosen. And so, yeah, sure, we hired Ron. We found out after a few months that Ron didn't really know how to program, and Mark Riley was carrying him. But eventually Ron became a good programmer in his own right, and he and Mark Riley and William Robinson were the three programmers that I left Datasoft with. We were kind of disgruntled with the company and started a new company called Everywhere, which didn't last very long, and we all ended up parting company. The band broke up. But yeah, O'Reilly's Mine, I was there. That was kind of O'Reilly's Mine. I think was kind of like I want to say Dig Dug or Miner 49er. I don't remember.
So I don't know the company Everywhere. Was it another little software company?
Yeah, it was a little software development company that got pulled into Datamost. They ended up getting paid by Datamost to write programs that Datamost would then publish.
Nice. Let's see, Pacific Coast Highway. Did I say that one yet? That's a good one.
Yeah, that was a rip-off of Frogger, right?
Yes. Yep.
I think that was either Riley or Rosen. I don't remember.
Pole Position, which I think was licensed for Atari. No.
Right, that was after me.
Puyan.
After.
Rosen's Brigade, Sands of Egypt. Yes.
Hold that. Yeah, both of those. I'm responsible. Yeah, I'm a responsible adult there. Sands of Egypt, mostly testing, some input on the game. But most of these guys back then, you got to remember, it was so early on that they were responsible for pretty much everything. They were doing the animation, they were doing the graphics, they were doing the sound, the programming. So my input, these guys were tough. And I should also point out, they were doing this stuff in machine code. That's how they were getting the performance out of the 6502 that was in the Atari, and it was in the Commodore 64, and it was in the Apple II. So my input was just, A&R, like I said. Who'd you say now? You said Pacific Coast Highway, and what was the other one?
Pacific Coast Highway,
Sands
Pole Position, Puyan, Sands of Egypt. Yeah.
Sands Position was just basically a adventure game.
That's 97, probably not you. Saracen, I don't know that game.
No.
Shooting
No.
Arcade, Starfire Warrior.
Mark Riley.
Yeah.
Yeah, I produced Starfire Warrior, no, but the Shooting Gallery, I produced that. I got production credits on all this stuff because it all eventually passed through my hands because of BP software. I said yay or nay whether it was going to ship today or not.
Tumblebugs?
Yeah, yes. Bob Bishop. This was Pac-Man. Bob Bishop had a thing for mazes. I mean, Bob Bishop was literally a JPL rocket scientist back in the early days. And in fact, I'll diverge here for a minute. One of the first programs that he did for me at Softape was a program called Bomber, and I titled it Bomber by Bob Bishop. And what it was a Apple II high-res game with a horizon line that went horizontal across the screen, left to right, a little tank that lumbered from left to right across the screen, and a bomber that flew from right to left across the screen. So the tank was on the horizon line, the single high-res line, and it was lumbering along. And the bomber, you would push the space bar, and a little dot, maybe it was 4 pixels, would drop, and it would come down, and you'd try to hit the tank. And I thought that was cool enough because the bomb would drop in a parabolic arc. So Bob had worked out the physics for a high-res animation to do that. And I thought that was good enough, but he says, well, keep trying. See if you can hit the tank. And finally, I was able to hit the tank, and the tank blew up in about, I don't know, maybe a dozen parabolic firework arcing, what would you call them? They were persistent firework streaks in a parabolic arc. It was the best. It was so cool. And I think we just did it for the Apple. It was about the same time he did Apple Vision 2, which was a program for the Apple II that demonstrated high-res, uppercase, lowercase on the Apple, which
that's
prior
a classic.
to that only had a uppercase character generator in high-res and low-res.
And
but that explanation came because you asked me about something else. You asked me about Bomber and something else.
Tumblebugs.
Bishop.
Tumblebugs is what I said.
A maze program, yeah, the Tumblebug. So yeah, Bob actually wrote a program besides generating pi out to I can't even remember how many places. He's done we did a print out of like 1 million places of pi. He did that on an Apple II, but he also generated the world's most complicated maze at that time. Then he took that maze and wanted to have something like Pac-Man, where these creatures would wander around and eat up the little dots on the page. So he came up with the idea of a dung beetle. And the dung beetles, of course, rolled around on pieces of feces and then laid eggs in them, out of which the little dung beetles would hatch. And he also wrote a routine that would create a magnifying glass that would, as you scrolled around, you could see a magnification of the beetle as it crossed over each of the little pieces of dung, and you were being chased by other dung beetles through the maze. So yeah, I was involved in producing that title.
But you must be so proud.
Well, back in those days to do that kind of stuff, no one had, we'd seen arcade games that did things from Williams. I mean, I guess the Fender by my buddy R.J. Michael was out, and we had they had big budgets, and they had lots of much more dedicated hardware than we had. We were doing all this in software on an 8-bit CPU running at 1 megahertz. I mean, it was pretty impressive, actually. Yeah, I was proud.
Good. Zaxxon?
No.
Zorro?
No.
I pirated so many of these games. It's like a laundry list of software I didn't pay for, and I'm sorry.
That's all right. When I was at Datasoft, I actually by hand, in the middle of the night, created a trade show booth that we ended up taking to the West Coast Computer Fair that year. And we set up a bunch of our titles, and they're demonstrating them. And I was wandering the halls one day, that one of those trade show days, and I ran across a company that was producing anti-piracy software. So you could crack titles and put them onto floppy disk. Mm-hmm. And I walked up and I think I see one of your manuals. And he handed it to me, and I was thumbing through it, and sure enough, one of our titles was listed in the book that we were just introducing there at the West Coast Computer Fair that day.
Jeez.
Now, back in the day, I mean, you could call me one of the first pirates because I was going around collecting quote unquote public domain software that we were then putting onto cassette tapes and distributing. But we did introduce one of the first cassette tape-based anti-piracy techniques for the Apple II, where we actually learned how to overwrite zero page. And it made so that once the tape was in memory, it couldn't be duplicated. I don't remember the details of the anti-piracy for cassette tape, but it was pretty effective for a while. Ultimately, we realized that pirates were going to be pirates, and we're just going to keep the honest people honest with anti-piracy.
Yeah. So what haven't I asked you about those days that I should have? You seem like you have more stories and more interesting things, and tell me something.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guys I hooked up with when I was at Datasoft, I connected with these guys that I met during the my days at Computerland. They had a little company called UME Corp, which stood for Ultimate Media Enterprises. They came out of the stereographic company they formed to do stereoscopic displays, computer displays, and they wanted to ultimately to do some kind of a 3D computer game platform. And I turned them on to this expert system technology, and about a year later, they invited me to come up and join the company as they were doing some things with music and 3D and da-da-da. So I went up there, and that then turned into a project which we called the 3E system. And we produced a prototype game console that was, I don't think I'm violating any non-disclosures after this many years, but we produced a console for Hasbro and Milton Bradley it was to demonstrate to them of what a stereoscopic 3D virtual reality game might look like. And we worked with Jaron Lanier. We used his goggles, which were the same goggles that were being used by Scott Forrester. Scott, I can't remember his last name, at NASA. And Dr. up at the HIT lab in Washington, Dr. Furness, who came out of the Air Force, I believe, where he developed heads-up displays using binocular goggles for Apache targeting systems, for Apache cannons and machine guns. In any case, we put together a demonstration unit using a Macintosh 68020 to drive the sensors. We were using $10,000 Polymus XYZ transceivers to determine where the goggles were in 3 space, whether they were looking up, down, left, right, forward, backwards. I think that thing cost $10,000. It's now been replaced, of course, by a 25-cent chip in every cell phone made, accelerometer and XYZ positioner, and Jaron's goggles, and an Amiga. Amiga was driving the graphics. We contracted a Electronic Arts programmer to do the graphics, and we were also using Jaron's glove. And I would help produce the software and direct the software development of a demo where these demon characters would be coming out of the screen at you, and you had to reach out with your glove, which was represented on the screen, and you'd have to grab these demons. They go screeching, and they're flopping in your hand, and you hear the sound effects. And you would take your hand and you would make a forceful downward movement, and the demons would then go into a grate that would open and close in the street. And that's how you got rid of them. Plus, something that hasn't really been done yet, we integrated stereoscopic 3D graphics using the Amiga Genlock. So it was a pretty amazing system.
Wow. Yeah.
That was about 1980, I want to say 86 to 88. The current prince of virtual reality, Mark Zuckerberg, was probably about 5 or 6 years old playing with crayons back then. But Hasbro Milton Bradley didn't see a future in it, so the project never went any further. I couldn't wait around for 25 years, whatever it was since then,
Sure.
for the $1 billion or $2 billion payoff that Lucky Palmer got. Or Palmer Lucky. I always got his name mixed up. So that was one of the stories from back then. Other things was the AI Expert, which melded my interest in fish. When I got my Apple II, the first thing I really wanted to do was put together a diagnostic program so that you would enter in the appearances of the fish and the behavior of the fish, and it would diagnose a disease and a treatment based on a very popular book at that time, where you would open the book and question 1 would ask you, are the fish fins clear or are they cloudy? And depending on how you answered it, would direct you into a logic tree to the next question that would ask you, you see fuzziness, are they breathing hard? But in a 16K Apple II, which I ultimately upgraded to 48K, 48K memory, dynamic NEC memory was like $500 at the time, not megabytes, not gigabytes, but K. There wasn't enough room for a treatment. So no matter what no matter how you entered the program, the ultimate decision was time to flush this fish. He's a goner. So when this expert system thing came around, as when I was president of VP of software for Datamost and turned these guys up in Marin onto this, I ended up going up there and working on that. And they were looking for some kind of a way to demonstrate a knowledge-based expert system where you would be given questions on a domain. Say, for example, which wine should I have for dinner? And you would ask an expert, a wine expert, and the first question he would ask you is, well, are you serving fish or poultry? And you'd answer that. Are you serving meat or pig, ribs, whatever? You'd answer that. Do you like sweet? Do you like dry? Red or white? It would just go on, and it would come up with a solution. So they wanted something like that to demonstrate the expert controller that we ultimately wanted to sell to industry, connecting them to PLCs. And I said, well, I've always wanted to do an expert for keeping more fish alive in a tank than you would if you didn't know how, if you didn't have my expertise on how to do it. And not only do I want to ask questions using this device, but I want some of the questions to be asked of sensors and get feedback automatically about temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, well, yeah, that's eminently doable. We've got a system that you can answer questions yes, you can answer no, or you can answer them maybe. And based on that, you can come up with a pretty good technique for keeping more fish in a tank alive than it had any business happening. So we actually built the system, and it worked real well. It ended up going to the Oceanic Institute in Hawaii, where they used it as an expert to help people effectively grow marine rotifers for feeding larval fish. It was pretty tricky to do. We also approached Genentech. There was procedures depending on a lot of parameters and an expert's knowledge on what to do when those parameters presented themselves to assure that you had success, so that you didn't dump $1 million worth of beasties, microbes, and bacteria because the expert wasn't there at the time when something happened pretty quickly, that something needed to be, a response needed to happen. So one day, and where this leads to what I'm doing now, sort of what I'm doing now, one day we're standing on the balcony of my office, and we're looking at these 3 trees, and 2 of them are going dormant for the winter. They're leafless. They're just getting ready to go dormant. But this one tree on the left was lush with green leaves and seed pods. It's like, what's with that tree? Well, one of the rules of my expert controller system was every weekend, no matter what, dump 15 gallons of nutrient-rich water over my balcony through a hose to the base of this tree on the left. So what was happening was it was getting all this nutrition, and it was delaying its departure into the winter mode.
Huh.
And what I discovered years later, 25 years later, was at that time, besides doing aquaculture, which is of course is very popular now, and some of the dire consequences we foresaw for the future of yields from the ocean, they weren't even close to what it turned out to be, and a reason for why we wanted to do aquaculture with expert systems. We were doing something called aquaponics. So some 25 years later, when a buddy of mine from that company asked me if I wanted to get back into what we were doing, I said, what, expert control of aquaculture? He goes, no, aquaponics. And the same way I said, what's an EEPROM? I said, what's aquaponics? And he proceeded to tell me it's the age-old way the Chinese have done for 1,000 years of growing food for billions of people, where you dig a hole, you put in water, you throw in some fish, you start feeding them crickets and worms, and they start doing their thing in the water, creating ammonia, which turns into nitrites and nitrates, and that turns into fertilizers, which feeds the plants around them. And you take that water, you feed your crops, and it's all organic and natural, and it conserves water, 95% less water than dirt crops, and you should look into it. So for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been doing aquaponics, and I've arrived at this nascent industry very early on in the party, like I did for the Apple II in 77, and I did for the virtual reality in 85. By the way, around that year, I was also doing arcade game conversions for a company that had rights to all of the all of the Sega arcade titles. Mm-hmm. So I was responsible for getting Outrun and Alien Syndrome and a bunch of real popular Sega arcade titles onto PCs and onto the Commodore and onto the Atari. So while you didn't read those titles to me, a bunch of those Sega titles that did appear on the Atari, and I think even the Atari ST, I was the producer of those titles.
What was that company called?
The company was called, Manlio Allegra was the name of the guy. He was the guy who controlled the licenses. He was working with the execs at Sega. I think he may have worked at Sega for a while, and I cannot remember the name of the company. I was a consultant for the company, and I was responsible, again, for troubleshooting and ensuring product quality and accuracy, et cetera, for some of those titles. Afterburner. I think I did Afterburner. And I did 5 or 6 titles. If you want to go look at the titles where that appeared on the Atari, I think they were mostly ST titles.
Okay,
maybe.
Cool.
I don't remember.
All right.
But so I've been doing this aquaponics thing now, and I got to this party pretty early, and I'm meeting the same kinds of guys I met back in the early Apple, Atari, Commodore days. They've got the passion for this. They know there's not a payoff right now, but somewhere down the line there's going to be, and they just see it as a good thing to be doing. They're setting up greenhouses on high school campuses, and the kids are integrating STEM with the growing of fish and plants. And we got kids from the computer labs that are putting together software for the Raspberry Pis to control some of the instrumentation for the aquaponics. So even though I've got a day job right now where I help oversee a couple hundred computers for a Bay Area nonprofit, which has kept me busy enough that I sort of put you off for a couple of years now. It pays the bills until this aquaponic thing really takes off. But with water concerns and GMO concerns and nutrition concerns and local availability of fresh produce and food desert concerns, I think there's a strong future for it. And unlike titles where I had to rely on a population owning one of the computers I was creating titles for, the marketplace in aquaponics for produce and fish is everywhere I look. Everybody I look at, these people are eating twice, sometimes 3 times a day. And so I think it's my future, it's my retirement. And if I can throw some technology at it so that anybody can do it, I'd like to have a personal computer of aquaponics that gets installed alongside your new home, the backyard, and you exchange fresh local produce with the neighbors and the community. So that brings us up to the present.
Nice. That sounds exciting.
I think it's ultimately the best work. I mean, I got to a point at ICOM Simulations where we would license a bunch of Sega titles, Roadrunner Warner titles, Roadrunner and Sonic the Hedgehog, and we did some fighting games, and I was working on those, and it was like scroll left, scroll right, punch, shoot, destroy, and I just said, that's it. I'm done with it. I'm out of the computer game industry. Thank you very much. And while I was at the second Game Developers Conference, where Chris Crawford had a room at the Holiday Inn in Milpitas with about 20 or 30 of us, I haven't been to a computer game developers conference, or I guess I could just call it GDC now, many, many years. Sometimes I'll stop by just to see if I can run into some friends and stuff. And I've been tempted lately, given the big VR push that's going right now. I just shake my head and wish them all the best. And they're now trying to enable ideas that we had, 25 years ago. And it's somewhat gratifying, but it's too late for me to get back into that game. It's a young person's game. It's a game played by folks who have got big development budgets and can wait out the cycle that it's going to take before either Sony or, I don't know if it's going to be Oculus Rift. I don't know if it's going to be Samsung that produces the true VR gaming console that we envisioned and produced a very expensive prototype of back in the late 80s.
We shall see.
Again, there's not a big market there yet for them, but it'll come, I think. And I'm not convinced that it's going to be VR. I think it's going to be mixed reality. I think it's going to be AR first, which is overlays on top of the real world. I think it may not even be glasses. I think I'm under non-disclosure, but I think there are some other display technologies that come down the road here that are going to happen. I was one of the guys that went to the HIT lab up in Washington, Dr. Furness's R&D lab at the University of Washington, where I put my head down onto an optical board, onto a little single ocular monoscope. I don't know what you would call it. It was like a microscope display, an ocular. You put your eyes, you see a magnification in a microscope, except in this case, you were looking at a chip. And that chip was a laser, low power laser that painted the back of my retina with an image from a cathode ray tube next to the optical bench, which had prisms and diodes and resistors, and you could see the laser beam that was traveling through the prisms. It was like right out of science fair project. Except when I looked into that ocular, I saw on the back of my retina the same display, high-res monochromatic, it was red, textual display that was on the expensive the CRT next to the display, but it was being painted on the back of my retina. So, I mean, I don't know if that's ever going to happen in the future. I walked outside to make sure there was no chance of a lightning strike that might hit the lab and cause that image to be permanently etched on the back of my retina. But I think the future for AR, VR, mixed reality, I think Apple is going to do something. I've been tempted to try and maybe get involved in it, but I think being a pioneer in that, working in that area back in those days was enough for me. I mean, I also got to meet some amazing people. I met the guy who's probably the father of VR, besides Ivan Sutherland, a guy named Mort Heilig, who produced the Sensorama, which was an arcade game an arcade display. You didn't play a game, but you sat down and had an experience where the seat you were sitting on vibrated, the handlebars you were holding onto vibrated. You were looking into stereoscopic ocular devices that were displaying a 3D stereoscopic 35 millimeter film of a flight over Los Angeles in 1960 something, or a drive through the streets of New York where you smelled through the device where your nose was in the Sensorama. You smelled the pizza. You heard in stereo 3D, in left ear, right ear, you heard the traffic around you. You smelled the perfume of the woman who was dancing in front of you in 3D, and you heard what's it called? Spatially located sounds of her with the castanets. At the time that I tried this in Mort's backyard, he had to take the canvas off it. It was underneath a trellis next to the pool. The seat didn't work anymore. The vibrational motor wasn't working. So when you're on the dune buggy on the dunes, you had like 4 experiences: New York, LA flyover, Brooklyn drive-through, and the belly dancer. When you're on the dune buggy, he would shake the seat. And when you were watching the belly dancer and she reached up and put her hand next to you, he would touch you, and he would touch the back of your neck or your back. It was truly a sensational sensorama experience. And so for me, it's good enough to have been around in those days when all the stuff was taking form. And now it's good enough for me to be around in these days of aquaponics.
Nice.
How long have you kept me on this?
An hour and 19 minutes.
20 minutes?
Yep. We're almost
done.
done.
Your usual interview?
An hour
We're
typically.
Almost done.
We're almost done. Typically an hour, but as long as it needs to be. I have one comment and one question for you. First of all, you might enjoy there's an event that happens every year in July called Kansas Fest. It's a gathering of Apple II users, and you might really enjoy it.
Yes, I probably would. I know that Bob Bishop gave a talk there. One of his last things he did, actually. Yeah. He gave a talk there, and I think he went several times there. And I've watched a couple of the videos from there. And you're probably right. Thanks for that suggestion, and I may do that someday. Okay.
Well, I'm signed up for this year, and you should go too. And I think
it's in July. You said?
Yeah, it's mid-July. Yep.
Yeah, we'll see.
Google Kansas Fest, you'll find it. Last question. If you could send a message to the Apple II and the Atari 800 users who are still out there listening to this, what would you tell them?
Oh, boy. It was a wonderful hobby when I was using the machines and working with the programmers. By the way, I didn't program. I did a very tiny bit in the early days in BASIC. I basically programmed programmers because I realized early on that if I wanted to have anything that was going to appear on these machines that I wanted to have appear on them, I was going to have to work with artists and programmers and musicians and animators. And that's what that ended up doing, and produced a lot of really good software. But I would say if they're still doing it today, I think it's a wonderful hobby. Bob Bishop, right to the end, was not interested in the multimedia aspects of what the computer industry evolved into. Basically, when Jeff Raskin tried to turn the Macintosh into and Steve Jobs into an appliance instead of a PC, which we used to call programmable computer, not personal computers, that really changed the what do you call it, of the industry, the look of the industry, if you will. And so certainly now the way people are getting into it, they're getting into it as appliance purchasers. You buy a PC, you buy an iMac, you buy a console, you buy a PlayStation, you buy a whatever. And but certainly there may still be things to be done in the 8-bit world with graphics that I mean, I don't think there's anything to be done on those machines you couldn't do and couldn't do better, quote unquote, whatever you define as better. I mean, I understand that retro computing is very popular. Putting the arcade emulators on more powerful machines today is very popular, but time to move on. I think that where the future is in the software, the experiences, whether they're on a platform that's still to come. And I believe Apple is going to do something big in this area. Microsoft is trying with holodeck. Holodeck, that's a whole other story with caves and the work done in Chicago. But I think that's really take advantage of what you got. I mean, we used to go to Toys R Us and buy Commodore 64s so we could take the SID chips out, because we would blow the SID chips in all of our 64 development systems. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, you've got so much, I mean, in the abilities, even in the mobile platforms, I mean, they're becoming powerful enough to dock to mice and keyboards and displays that what's coming down the next 10 years is going to eclipse what we did in the first 10 years of the 8-bit computers. Concentrate on what that can bring as experiences and new visions and new realities, if you will, rather than to, it's enjoyable to use some of these old arcade games. I love playing Tempest. And if you give me the Aardvark, I'll play that for a long time. And I still like flight simulators. But boy, give me 3 displays and a good flight simulator package. That's really where I think the future lies. Mm-hmm. The kids today, I don't think you can give them an Apple II or an Atari 800 and expect to occupy them for very long. So I guess that's what I'd say.
All right, fair enough. I have what I need. Thank you so much, Gary.
All right, now, well, thanks a lot for persisting. I mean, I'm a big believer in patience and perseverance and persistence, and you exhibited all that. And best of luck to you, man.
Thanks. Appreciate your time.
Sure. Talk to you later.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.